Remember all the people who said the system worked, that Donald Trump was stopped from overturning the 2020 election results by guardrails, by the political system? Well, Republicans noticed, and at the state level, they're getting rid of the people who did the stopping. We've told you before about the election-denying Republicans vying for Secretary of State jobs in swing states that Trump lost: Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan. But what's happening in Michigan in particular goes even deeper than that. It's fast becoming a ground zero for a Trumpian takeover of the GOP and the key election roles in that state. Late last month, state Republicans selected their candidate for Secretary of State, the person who would be in charge of overseeing Michigan's elections, far-right conspiracy theorist Christina Karamo. She was a GOP poll watcher in 2020 who still today falsely claims election fraud happened.
I was not thinking about running for Secretary of State, but things changed. Things definitely changed when I was a poll challenger at the TCF Center in Detroit, and I saw multiple statutory violations. I saw a process designed to corrupt the system. I saw illegal ballots being cast.
Those allegations have been debunked, of course. How did she get through? Well, she wasn't picked by Republican voters. She was selected by the Michigan GOP's precinct chairs, local activists and leaders, the same precinct-level officials that former Trump aide Steve Bannon has told his podcast listeners to fill in, to go take over in order to remake the GOP.
This is the ability to take over the Republican Party, because this is where the votes are. It's a pyramid, and this is the base of the pyramid.
In Michigan, election deniers are taking that advice to heart and purging the party of any dissidents. You see, every county in Michigan has an election canvassing board made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans to certify election results. And in 8 of Michigan's largest 11 counties, Republicans have ousted GOP canvassers who certified Joe Biden's winning results. Many of them are being replaced by extremist Trump fans who've pushed the big lie or have said they wouldn't have certified the 2020 vote. So Michigan shows how Republicans have ruthlessly, efficiently spent the past year and a half, plugging all those holes in the 2020 plan. All of the guardrails that held in that election are coming down. Yet there are still those who say it's alarmist to look at all this and think democracy itself is in danger. Many of them are the same voices who said they won't actually try to ban Muslims, they won't actually revolt violently, they won't actually overturn Roe v. Wade. So far, the alarmists have been alarmingly correct. As democracy expert Brian Klaas tweeted on Tuesday, the political forces that orchestrated an attempted authoritarian takeover of the United States haven't faced any serious consequences. And that's part of the reason why the authoritarian takeover is ongoing, not in the past. It's happening right now. Chilling and true. And he joins me now. Brian Klaas is an associate professor of global politics at University College London, a Washington Post columnist, and author of the book Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. Brian, thanks for coming back on the show. There is a GOP candidate for governor in Michigan named Ryan Kelly, and he posted this speech to his campaign site recently. Have a listen.
You talk about Marxism and communism in relation to socialism. It starts with democracy. That's the ticket for the left. They want to push this idea of democracy, which turns into socialism, which turns into communism in every instance.
Brian, I, for one, had no idea that the ancient Athenians were really commies in disguise. We have candidates openly denouncing democracy as a communist plot. How do we get here? How do we get out of it? How bad is it?
It's really, really bad. I mean, I think this is a situation where every single warning light that blinks when democracies are under threat and are drifting towards authoritarianism is blinking in the United States right now. And I think the people who were overly optimistic, both during the Trump presidency that the guardrails would hold and after the Trump presidency that the threat was over, have been proven wrong, because Trumpism has taken root in the heart of the GOP, and it's advancing a systematic attempt to degrade democracy in the United States, openly, in plain sight, in front of us, with attempts to basically punish those who stand up for democracy and to attract those into positions of power who would subvert democracy. So, I think that this is something where we have to just stop mincing words about this. The mainstream of the Republican Party has become authoritarian. And I'm extremely worried that in 2022 and 2024, we're going to see further erosions of democracy that may be beyond repair, unfortunately.
So you talk about the guardrails and we talk about some of these institutions. I'll be honest, I didn't even know about what exactly election canvassing boards did or how influential they could be until the 2020 election. Michigan law says they're purely clerical. They're just supposed to, dot the I's, cross the T's, and yet Republicans are ruthlessly targeting them. Democrats, meanwhile, seem to be AWOL. They're not engaging their base on these admittedly historically mundane and minor election positions, but which could now be crucial come 2024.
Yeah, Mehdi, this is one of the times where I wish my work was really irrelevant, but it's not. It's super relevant for the United States. I study and I write about, and my book is about cultures of corruption and the lack of accountability and how it causes people to abuse their power. And we're seeing that right now in the United States. So to become a Republican official in 2022, what you basically have to do is to commit to spreading lies on behalf of Donald Trump. You have to say the election was rigged. You have to behave in ways that show that you're going to try to subvert democracy, and then you will rise to the top. If you don't do that, they will come after you. They will try to purge you. And you know that as an electoral candidate, you have no chance of getting past the election if you are unwilling to go along with those lies. So that's the sort of self-selection effect of drawing the wrong kinds of people into the politics. But then on top of that, we have absolutely no consequences for people who openly tried to subvert democracy in 2020. In fact, they're getting rewarded. And I think when you look at what happens in cultures of corruption, accountability is absolutely crucial because it sets the benchmark for what you can get away with. And what people have understood in the Republican Party is that you can get away with a heck of a lot. You can be openly stoking the events around January 6th and then move on to trying to subvert elections in 2022, to promote candidates who openly say they think democracy is a bad thing. And then, they become stars in the party. So we have engineered a system in which the people who get rewarded politically are those who are most opposed to democracy, and the people who get punished the most are those who are standing up in defense of democracy. It's a warped world, but it's also one that's a recipe for a massive scale degradation of the democratic quality in the United States. And that's why I'm so pessimistic in the short term if we don't have our democratic leaders stand up and indeed some of the few Republicans who have actually taken measures to do so to defend democracy while we still can.
Yeah, time is running out, as you say, and the warning signs are blinking. There are measures that could be taken, which aren't being taken. As a naturalized American who came from Britain, it's mind-blowing to me that you have a national election in America and there are 50 different sets of laws governing the voting. The Democrats' Freedom to Vote Act would have set nationwide baseline election standards, but they couldn't get that past Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and a Republican Senate filibuster. The state-by-state differences is a real problem here, right? Easily exploited.
It is a problem because it provides vulnerabilities and it also politicizes elections in a way that's really corrosive. One of the things that isn't talked about enough in the United States, and I say this as someone who's an American living in London, is that, it's like we have all these problems in the US and we say, why is there so much dysfunction? Why can't we figure this out? The rest of the world has figured this out. These problems that exist around American elections do not exist in other developed democracies. And it's not because they're rocket scientists or geniuses. They've just come up with common sense solutions that are depoliticizing elections and maximizing the ability of voters to turn out and cast their ballots and have them accurately counted and all the things that you need to do around elections. It's pretty straightforward. It's not the hardest thing a democracy has to deal with in terms of election administration. And yet we still are consistently creating rules that make it so easy to disenfranchise people, particularly on racial lines. We have gerrymandered districts, uncompetitive elections, all sorts of poisons that are helping Republicans who want to subvert democracy, unfortunately.